Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Squad Room, the podcast devoted to creating and optimizing a healthy and fulfilling life for first responders all around the world. I'm your host and the founder of the Squad Room. I'm Garrett Teslaw. I'm also a sergeant for a sheriff's department in Southern California. On this show here, I talk to experts in a variety of fields looking for those force multipliers that I can apply to my own life. My goal is to make you happier and healthier so you can pursue our challenging careers with energy, clarity, and a commitment to our oath. If this is your first time on the show or listening to the show, thanks for being with us. And if you are a long-time listener, thank you as well. Our guest today is Nick Frankus. Nick is Portland Police Department. Nick's got about 17 years on the job. And he's also a fellow podcaster. He's got an excellent podcast I highly recommend called Work on the Edge. It's a podcast devoted not just to law enforcement. It's about all sorts of different issues for people who work in high-stakes environments. Obviously, that includes us. And he's got some great material out there. And today, I wanted to bring him on the show because of an episode he did, a short episode, but something that I thought just immediately applied to us, and it immediately applied to the testing process and that process of even just getting hired and then going through the academy in your rookie year and maybe your promotion and all those sorts of things. And that's something that we often struggle with, and that's confidence. Do we succeed because of our confidence? Or the struggle that we have between, being a type A person who's confident and wants to show competence, because competence is important in our job. And we discuss why it's important and how it was important to Nick, and how his competence and his confidence was tied up in his competence, and why we need to be why we need to eschew that and focus our confidence. I knew I was going to trip up on this. Why we need to focus our confidence in our ability to be courageous and our ability to be humble. It's a great conversation. I actually could have kept recording for another hour because I thought so much about what he had to say was just completely on point. I thought for us in law enforcement, we tie so much of our confidence to our competence that as we go through our career and we get the certification from graduating the academy, and we get the badge, and then we get the pin that shows that we're an expert shooter, and we get the badge, or that we get another pin, or the epaulet, or the something or other that shows that we're on the SWAT team, and the other thing that shows that we're on the bomb team, and all of a sudden we have all these external showings of confidence. We joke in my department. We joke about looking like a South African or a South American dictator. With some of the uniforms that are out there, with all the badges and the pins and the awards and all that stuff, are all these external showings of confidence, of competence. These things that are external, that the public or that another partner looks at. They look at this uniform with all these decorations on it, and it non-verbally tells that person of the wearer's competence. And as a result, we often have confidence in that person. And maybe that's completely justified, and maybe it's not. But more importantly, it's not about having confidence in others. This is about having confidence in yourself, and how those external showings of competence and how those achievements in competence are closely tied to our confidence, and how they probably shouldn't be. Anyway, it's a really interesting conversation. Nick's a great guest. You can go to his podcast, Work on the Edge, or workontheedge.com is his website to learn more about what he's trying to achieve out there. But it was just a really great conversation. Nick's a great guy, and Portland's a big city. It's a tough city to be a cop in, and we touch on it a little bit. Tough city to be a cop in, just with the dynamic out there. So I think that it's really great that he's stepping out there, and I always want to support another cop out there doing something good for his community. All right, real quick, to follow us on Instagram and Twitter, it's at The Squad Room. And if you do enjoy today's episode with Nick, feel free to share this with a friend, a loved one, someone who needs to hear this. But on to Nick Frankus, Portland PD, host of Work on the Edge podcast. Nick Frankus, Portland PD. Thanks for being on the show, Nick. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Garrett. I appreciate it.
Excited to talk to you. I always enjoy talking to any other cop in the country, but another cop with another podcast. So we'll get to that in a little bit. But you reached out to me after one of the most recent episodes, and we got to chatting, and you turned me on to some of your work, and I was really, really, really impressed with some episodes that you did on a topic of confidence, which we'll get to in a little bit. But for our listeners to get to know you, Tell me about you know your career and what you're doing. Well, let me back up. You're a cop, and I always like to ask, what made you want to become a cop, a law enforcement officer?
To be honest with you, I hate it when people ask me that question. Not that I'm mad at you or anything, but as a cop, you get that question all the time. For me, I don't really have an answer because I just always knew, like, that's just always what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
There was just never any question about it, and I never really questioned it too much. I mean, there's the obvious, reasons that everybody says, like, I want to help people, which is true. I've yet to come up with a good answer to that question, to be honest with you, because it's just always been there, and it's not something I can really pinpoint, to be honest with you.
Something that goes like so. I was having this discussion in the car with my son on the way to school today. He's 5, and he talks about us being partners one day. Does it go back that far to when you were a young kid and just you gravitated towards that idea of cops and robbers, or did you see it somewhere did you have a mentor growing up, a dare officer, or somebody that kind of turned you onto it? Where do you think that started, at least?
Yeah, I mean, like every little kid, I wanted to be a professional athlete. That was my original kind of career goal. But around high school, I got involved with the cadet program in the town where I grew up. So I was a police cadet there, and this is a super small department. This was a total department size of 5 at the time. I think a chief, a sergeant, and 3 officers, and then there was 3 of us that were cadets, and I really just, I fell in love with it then. I mean, I was in love with it before that, and that's why I wanted to do it. And but at the time, I was scared to death. I knew, so going into college, I knew what I wanted to be. I went through a program called the Police Corps. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. I don't think it's around anymore, but essentially, it's like at the time, it was like a ROTC for police officers, where they give you college money, college scholarships, and then you're obligated to do 4 years at a police department. In return for the college money. So I got involved in that program when I was a freshman in college. But at the time, growing up in a town, I mean, my town was 1,800 people. I had a graduating class of around 60 people or something like that. I mean, this is a small town in Oregon.
Yeah.
And so I was scared to death to go work for a big city. I thought I wanted to work for a real small department because that's all I knew. But at the time, to get into this police corps program, Portland was the only agency in Oregon that was participating in that program. So if I wanted to do this program and stay around Oregon, which I did, I had to go to Portland. And I mean, it scared the bejeebers out of me, but I decided to do it. And I'm glad I did. Now I couldn't imagine working anywhere smaller than Portland. But
do you have family in law enforcement and family history, or are you the first generation?
Nope, first one, no connection whatsoever.
Yeah, me too. So you chose Portland. What did you study in school? Was it police related or?
Yeah, criminal justice.
Criminal justice. Okay. So you just explain why you chose Portland. For people who don't understand or aren't familiar with Portland as a city, other than that you have excellent beer there in the city limits. What's Portland like, both as a city and as a department? How big are you?
We're roughly 1,000 officers. I mean, we're floating under that a little bit now. We have a bunch of shortages like most everybody, but we're roughly 1,000 officers. It's the biggest department in the state. It is, Portland, policing in Portland is it feels like a pretty unique experience. Not completely unique to the West Coast. I mean, there's other departments on the West Coast that are probably similar, but it's a very liberal town that prides itself on being weird. Bumper stickers all over the place saying "Keep Portland Weird," and they do a pretty good job of that most of the time. But that's what makes Portland, unique. It's a cool place, but there's a lot of challenges when it comes to policing in that environment. There's a loud, a real vocal anti-police component. Most of the people in Portland, really do support the police, and the statistics support that. But there's a real kind of loud anti-police element there, so that makes it challenging at times. But all in all, it really is a good place to work. And like I said, I couldn't imagine working anywhere else at this point. And
how long have you been on now?
Let's see, somewhere between 16 and 17 years.
Okay, and in that, and a half, so. that's a good amount of time. In that 16, 17 years, what assignments have you done, and where have you been? I don't want to say what have you accomplished, but I mean because I don't want to equate accomplishment with specialty assignments. But what are the things that you've done while you've been there?
Yeah, I did my first 5 years. I did in patrol, and then I ended up transferring to our narcotics unit, and I did about 11 years in narcotics. Just went back to the road actually back in October. I'm also for the last 8 years or so, I've been on the SWAT team, and in Portland, that's a collateral duty. It's not a full time job, and so about half my time ends up being SWAT related, and about half is whatever else I'm doing. And so like everybody else, we're having a hard time finding people, and we were cutting people out of specialty units to go back to patrol to beef up the patrol numbers. And at some point, I think the boss just realized, hey, if you're gone half the time anyway, and we got to do more with less. So I ended up going back to patrol. So I've been doing that for the last couple months, and boy, that's been interesting. It feels like I'm brand new all over again. Being away for 11 years, a lot's changed in those 11 years. But it's like I said, it's fun. It feels like I'm brand new all over again. So.
That's a nice perspective on it. We're going through the same thing where we have our narcs and specialty assignments going back to patrol because we're just so slimmed. We're just strapped for people. Is it a budget issue in Portland, do you think, or is it a recruitment issue in terms of having a hard
No,
time
it's a
getting
personnel
people?
issue. I mean, we've had budget things from here. I mean, it's an old budget thing. For a while it was a budget thing, and so we went on a hiring freeze and didn't bring on a lot of people when we should have been hiring. We were frozen, and now we're trying to catch up, make up for lost time. Now there's, from what I understand, plenty of money, but we're fighting over good people like everybody else is.
Yeah, it's getting harder and harder to recruit. So the SWAT experience, you said you've gone about half the time. Sounds like your SWAT team is pretty active.
Yeah, we're fairly active. I'd say somewhere between 80 and 100 operations a year is kind of where we float at. We train, a bare minimum, probably 25 to 30% of our time at a minimum is training. And then there's always other things that pop up for individual skill stuff or small group stuff. So between the training and the operations, it ends up being about half the time. In fact, our SWAT guys that are in patrol only count as half a body towards their personnel limit because they're gone so much. So,
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So, you may hate this question too, but let me ask it anyway. What, that amount of time on, things change, and you said like you feel like a new guy coming back to patrol, but I asked you why you wanted to become a cop, but 16, 17 years in, other than the pension, what do you still enjoy about it, or why do you still want to be a cop?
Yeah, and it's interesting with that new perspective of going back to the street. Last time I was in patrol, I was the brand new cop. I was working night shift. I had a partner that I worked with every night, and we were out rolling looking for bad guys. I mean, every night we were working hard looking for bad guys, and that's what at the time, that's what my idea of a good cop was somebody who was out there looking for bad guys. If we stopped a good normal citizen, it was by accident. We didn't have a lot of contact with those people on the night shift, and if we got interrupted by a call for service, we got a little bit annoyed by that. And we tried to get through it as quickly as we could so we could go find more bad guys. Somebody got their house broken into, I'd show up to their call and we'd try to rush through it as fast as we could, which I now know, is not really the kind of service we're trying to provide, but that's what my perspective was at the time. And so it's kind of fun going back now, a little bit more mature and a little bit with a different perspective on policing, that I still like looking for bad guys, and I still think that's a big part of our job. But it's been fun to kind of transition my mindset a little bit to really being more of a public servant in a different way. Really serving and trying to be the best, trying to give every person that we come across and every call for service the best experience that they can have, which wasn't my focus. When I was a new cop, I just wanted to go out and chase bad guys. So now it's kind of fun to really focus on, if this person was, a family member of mine and this thing happened to them, how would I want them dealt with? And so that's kind of how I approach things now. And it's a lot different perspective than what I've used to before. So I really enjoyed that. And I really love the SWAT team work and the camaraderie and teamwork aspect of that. I mean, that's my favorite part of my job. I'd be lying if I said that, that wasn't a huge part of why I keep doing this, because it is.
Sure. Yeah, I think a lot of people can understand that. And I think a lot of people understand that arc or that transition, too, from wanting to go out and hunt and, like you say, be annoyed by the call for service to understanding the bigger picture. of what we're trying to accomplish in general. All right, so recently you started a podcast, and as a cop who started a podcast myself, good for you, but also that's a lot of work in between the shift work that you're now on patrol, the SWAT call-outs and the training, being relatively social or being being having a family, that sort of stuff. What inspired you to start your show? And before we do that too, I should say your show is called Work on the Edge. It's available in all the places where podcasts are available, and it's not just about law enforcement. So I have some questions about that too. But what inspired you to start the show in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, kind of what it came down to was a lot of and we'll talk about this more as we get into kind of more of my story and the confidence thing. But, as a part of this, my experiences in the SWAT community and within my SWAT team, we have a lot of these conversations about just kind of different mindsets about things. I learned a lot of lessons, that applied in these, what I call high stakes situations, where in this, in police work in general and in SWAT stuff, specifically, we're dealing with situations that I don't want to make it overly dramatic, but there is a real kind of life or death, aspect to some of these things. And so it's important that you kind of bring your best to it. And so, one of the things I love about our team is that we really have a lot of these conversations about mindset and ways to train and ways to think about discipline and ways to talk about teamwork and leadership. And we have these conversations. And I just thought, man, it's a shame that, these conversations end here. So much of these talks we're having and these lessons that I learned in this environment, they're applicable to so many areas of our life. And so I really wanted to start spreading those messages to people who maybe not have the opportunity to have those kind of conversations that I was having on a pretty regular basis. And I really enjoyed them, and I thought maybe there'd be some benefit for other people to hear some of those conversations too.
That's great, and I think a lot of what you talk about on your show is you can apply, or you see the correlation immediately to our job. And I don't think you're being dramatic at all when you say that some of these things are life and death. I mean, it sounds. It might be a cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason, right? I mean, there's so much truth in that. So, are you inspired then typically from these conversations itself, or what are the other things that you've brought into the lessons in the conversation that you're giving on the podcast? I mean, in the sense of books that have influenced you, or other people or other mentors, that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'd say somewhere, kind of all in this time frame, I had a lot of change just over the last 5 years. I've changed a lot, kind of feel like as a person, and not to get, too sappy on you here, but I've made a lot of changes in just kind of the way I think about the world and the way I think about myself. And so I've always been a pretty heavy reader. I read a lot of books. I can't say that, there's one particular book that sent me down this path, but I read about 50 books a year, and sometimes I read so much that I forget some of the stuff that I've read. But books are definitely a big part of it. And looking for these mentors. There's mentors. I kind of believe in this philosophy of, I don't know if you've heard this before. There's a MMA fighter. I can't remember the name, but he basically says you should always have somebody above you that you look to as a mentor, and that mentors you basically. You should always have a mentor or kind of a peer, somebody at your same level, and then you should always be trying to mentor the people below you. And so, of course, there are people within my department who I look up to and are kind of mentors to me. Mm-hmm. And then I try to take every opportunity I can. Of course, I'm surrounded by my peers all the time, and I learn what I can from my direct, kind of relative peers. And then I try to take every opportunity I can also to reach down to the people who are new at this, whether it be police work in general or whether it be new SWAT officers, to really get involved in the training and development of new officers. I'm a assistant instructor with our training division at Portland. We have our own training division, so I go out and I help with the advanced academies and those kind of things, and help bring up new cops. And then I also train at our Oregon Tactical Officers Association, kind of basic SWAT school every year, where all the new SWAT officers from the state come through that. So I think it's important to really have all three levels of influence, one above you, below you, and kind of at the same peer level.
All right. So you said you didn't want to get too sappy, but we're going to get sappy. 5 years ago, you said you changed. A lot changed. What changed?
Well, we'll kind of start getting into my story here a little bit. I'm one of those guys that, I never. So I've always had kind of relative levels of success at everything I did. I was an athlete, played football in high school. Of course, like I said, it was a super small town, but I was kind of the small town football star, right? Which, again, super small town, so I'm not trying to impress anybody here, but it was just kind of this relative level of success. And then I played football at college, and again, relative levels of success. I had, a good time doing that. Nothing too crazy. But, if somebody were to tell me, if I were to tell myself, that I actually had a problem with confidence, throughout that, that would be the last thing that I would ever think that I had was a problem with confidence. People would tell me all the time, they had a lot of confidence. They might have actually used different words like cocky and arrogant, but I knew what they meant. They just meant that I was really confident, at least that's what I thought.
Uh-huh.
And so I had a particular experience, it was during training at SWAT training one day where, long story short, I shot the wrong person right in the face. I shot an innocent person. It was a hostage rescue scenario. This is, early on in my career. In fact, within the first few months of me getting hired as a SWAT guy. And, and I screwed up really bad, and I shot this innocent hostage in the face. And
this is training or a real call out?
No, this is training.
In training, okay.
And it wasn't like this light bulb, switch moment where it happened right then, but that moment started me down this road of thinking, I'm like that could have been a real deal. I could have a call out just like that tonight after I've made this big mistake. My confidence was destroyed at that point because I had based all my confidence on being good at things, because my entire life I had been relatively good at things, and so I thought that's where my confidence had came from. But I realized then, and I started looking after the way I felt after I made this huge mistake was I didn't have any confidence, but I knew that I had to get some back, because the reality of it was that night I could go out and have a very similar call out for real. And so I started trying to figure out, like, where does confidence actually come from? Because I don't have any right now, and I need to get it back. And so I started trying to think about ways of, that I could think about confidence that was actually more useful, because I found out that treating your confidence or basing your confidence in your competence or being good at things was just a terrible way to do it. So I started thinking about what is confidence really? When I see someone that's confident, or I think about confidence, what is that? And I started looking around at the people around me who I thought were confident people, or I saw different interactions with different people. I thought that person seems really confident. And what was it? What made that difference? And what it came down to, what I ultimately settled on, was that confidence is really a sense of freedom. Like, these people walked around with this weightlessness. They were not burdened by, anything. They felt free, right? And it's like that's what confidence is just this sense of freedom, and not feeling free to do something. Like, anytime if you don't have enough confidence to do something, the reality of it is that you don't feel free to do it, for whatever reason. It could be a lot of different reasons. And so I settled on this idea that confidence was freedom. And then how do you actually go about developing that? And the way that we typically think of confidence, I was going to say teach, but confidence isn't really taught. And that's kind of part of my goal here, is to maybe start teaching confidence, is to start getting people to think about it. But the way we typically think about confidence is that it's based in being good at things. And so we typically, the normal kind of way to think about your confidence is, when you get good at things, you will feel more confident. Psychologists call it the competence loop. And so it's like, as you get better at things, you feel more confident, which then allows you to get better at things, which makes you feel more confident. And it all sounds real great on paper, but it can all come crashing down real quickly, as I found out.
That's an interesting idea, that confidence is a sense of freedom. So you mean that, if I understand you correctly, then confidence gives you the ability to go do things, or confidence is...
It's like a chicken or the egg problem, right?
Yeah, that's exactly how I'm trying to put it into words. So confidence gives you the ability to go out and try new things, or trying new things or different things or things outside your wheelhouse, that's what gives you confidence.
Well,
Does that make any sense?
Yeah, and like I say, it's kind of a chicken or the egg problem, and it's a little bit of both. But describe confidence as freedom, and so if you rely on having to be good at everything in order to feel confident, then how in the world do you ever start something new that you don't know anything about or that you're not good at? I don't know if you had the same experience, but when I started, when I wanted to start my podcast, I literally wanted to start this podcast, my podcast, probably 2 years before I actually pulled the trigger.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't. And I look back on it. What the reality of it was is that I didn't feel free to start because I wasn't good at podcasting yet. So I was studying. I was trying to learn how to podcast. I was trying to figure out all the perfect settings and how to get the website right and all that. And I figured out. And I was telling myself, when I get good at podcasting, then I'll start podcasting. Well, that doesn't make any sense. I didn't feel free to start.
Right.
So I was carrying on this burden. I like to picture it like a ball and chain. Like if you have to be good at things in order to experience confidence, that is not freedom. That's us being a slave to your competence. And so so that's a bad way to think about it. But it's just, you want that general sense of freedom, and that it just feels good. It just feels good to be confident. It feels good to feel free. Mm-hmm. But you can develop more of that through. So I broke this down into being free, and then how do you actually develop that? So maybe I should get into that. Is what I kind of came down to is the ability to be courageous and humble at the same time. A lot of times we think of those things as two separate ideas, but when you combine those things together, it's a really interesting way to think about your confidence. The reality is that confidence isn't even real. Like, confidence doesn't exist. You can't touch it. You can't feel it. You can't smell it, thankfully. But it's just something that we make up in our minds. It's all in our head. We make it up. So however you decide to feel confidence, that's how you're going to feel it. And so I was figuring if I'm going to make something up anyway, I might as well make something up that's actually helpful and useful in every situation, not just in situations that I'm good at. Because there may be all kinds of things that I want to do that I'm not good at, and so I don't feel free to start yet if I base my confidence in competence. So it's really about looking for opportunities to show courage and humility at the same time. That's where you continue to generate more and more confidence.
I like that a lot, that being courageous and humble at the same time. That's a tough thing to accomplish, especially for a type A personality, any one of us in this job. And so much of our competence, we're in a profession where your competence is continuously tested, right? I mean, you have quarterly qual, you have your SWAT physicals, you have the quarterly training, or however, your ongoing updated training that you're required to go to. Here in California, you advance through the post certificates as you get, certain degrees or certain years of experience, and your competence is continually reinforced, to you. I mean, you can constantly get certificates, school, certificates for going to a certain school that say you've got this particular training, or you wear a pin on your uniform because you just got a certain score on your annual badge shoot or your qualification shoot. All these outward rewards for demonstrating competence, and I think you're onto something with this idea that we tie up so much of our confidence in those things, especially in the outward signs of it, the outward displays. I guess I'm wondering how we move away from that, though. I mean, I know you say we tie it up with being courageous and humble, but how do we start moving towards that kind of a perspective?
Yeah, so it starts with just having the awareness, and kind of what we're doing here is you got to shift that paradigm from confidence coming from being good at things. I'll get into that later, but there's three kind of traps that you can fall into here. So,
all right.
That's a real challenge. I mean, that's how we get to this place, is that especially for high achievers and people who really enjoy doing well at things, And I should have prefaced by saying this, that I have the belief, I really, truly, honestly believe that every single one of us has this innate desire to feel confidence.
Sure.
To feel like, I feel like that's what drives all of us towards everything. I feel like that's the ultimate human motivator is confidence. And it's just that feeling of freedom. Like, who doesn't want to be free? That's like the best feeling that you could have. And so when we, for high achievers who have always been good at things or finding levels of success in whatever area they're at, we think that we've gotten that success because how am I phrasing this? Our confidence is based in the fact that we did good at things. And so it's hard to think about it in any different way. So I'm going to tell you about these three different, if I could tell you about these kind of three traps that we sometimes fall in, and maybe this will help answer your question. I call them the three paradoxes of confidence. So there's the first one is called the humility paradox. And so, as a society in general, we're kind of drawn. People are kind of drawn to these like alphas, right? The fearless leader, the decision maker, the person who always speaks up, the person who always has a plan. The ultimate authority. There's some psychologists that think that there's more, male leaders in business, not because they have better ideas or because they're, better leaders, but just because they're more likely to speak up, and they appear more certain about their thoughts when they speak up. And so, consciously we can value consciously we value humility. We think, we'd like to see a humble person. We really, when we consciously think about it, we think humility is great, but unconsciously we're drawn to these kind of alpha type positions. And I like to illustrate this by thinking about, right after 9/11, you see videos of, George Bush or, Rudy Giuliani, and you watch these videos of these guys in that time, this tremendously scary time in American history, and there is nothing about them that feels like they have anything other than confidence, right? They're like, hey, we're going to solve this problem. We're going to go out and fix this. It's all going to be good. Imagine if they were to say, you know what, American people, I'm pretty scared about this and I don't know what to do. Like, we're looking to you as our leader, and that person was going to say, I'm pretty scared about this and I don't know what to do. But here's the reality. They were scared and they didn't know what to do. Yeah. I mean, this is an incredibly complex situation. 3,000 people just died on your watch. Of course they were scared. And so, but if the American people saw the president stand there and say, boy, I'm kind of scared and I don't know what to do, and just showed some real humility, we would not allow that to happen. People would freak out. We're looking to you as our leader. So the humility paradox is that, true humility shows strength. But a lot of times we view it as weakness. We view it as failure. And so we expect humility from others, but we often aren't humble enough to accept it when it comes.
Interesting.
And and that happens, that works within our departments too, right? Like, people will, there's this fear to speak up about, mistakes in police work. And, I can understand it. Police work in general tends to be real. We kind of almost get a defensive nature, and I don't want to paint us in a bad light, but there's, all the stuff going around in the country and all this pressure we're getting. We tend to be take a little bit of a defensive nature, not just on a personal level, but organizationally.
Oh yeah.
And it's because we need to have this sense of competence. We feel like we need to let everybody know that we're good at this. And a lot of it's for civil and liability reasons, And so I understand why it happens. But we end up sometimes defending things that really probably shouldn't be defended. I should have looked this up. I wish I could find it. But there was a hospital, and hospital and medical environments are, very civil liability driven, just like law enforcement is, and really concerned about the civil liability. And there was this hospital who decided that, when they screw up, and they recognize internally that they've made a mistake, they're not going to try and defend it anymore. They're going to go to the person who was affected by the mistake, apologize, admit that, hey, we screwed this up. We know we screwed this up. And it's just kind of this experiment to see what would happen with their civil liability. Their civil liability payouts basically disappeared. I mean, they have some here and there, but they were so worried about being vulnerable and showing their humility, but it ultimately ended up working out good for them, you know. And I would love to see more police departments take this stance, but we really get defensive when it comes to being good at things. So that's the humility paradox. You know, which is it's a challenge to show humility, because a lot of times it's not accepted as a good thing. It's sometimes accepted as a sign of weakness when it's not. You know, the other challenge when it comes to competence is what I call the fear paradox. And so, you know, imagine if you're walking through, you know, an African savanna. Of course, I've never been on an African savanna, but I imagine there's lots of things on an African savanna that could hurt you, you know. And we'll just take for example, a lion. You know, you're walking through the savanna, you're much more likely to mistake some grass as a lion than you are to mistake the lion for a piece of grass, right? Because we have this overwhelming our bodies have this overwhelming desire to protect itself. And so this fear response, this natural fear response that comes from within all of us is present. And we're much more likely to find things that aren't actually harmful to us as harmful. And so we try to avoid those harmful things. But the problem is that our bodies only have one physiological response to two different kinds of fear. There's physical fears, things that can actually harm our bodies, like the lion, and then there's psychological fears that can't actually do us any harm, you know, like public speaking maybe, or maybe it's taking a promotional test, or you know, maybe it's getting back in the gym if you've been out of it for a while and you're afraid to walk into that gym for what people are going to think. There's psychological fear, so you can't actually get hurt from that thing. But the response in our body is exactly the same. The body only knows one kind of fear, but our mind knows two kinds. And so what we have is this system that's designed to keep us alive actually keeps us from living in a lot of cases, right? It keeps us from doing the things that we really want to do because of fear.
Sure.
So that's kind of an interesting paradox of fear. And then the last kind of paradox of competence, I call it the shifting definition paradox. So anytime you start some new project, some new skill, any sort of new development of a skill, there's kind of four stages. There's the initiating, you know, you're starting, you're just beginning. Then there's the learning and the development, you know, where your skills, you know, get better over time. And then at some point you reach what kind of a mastery phase. And at the beginning of this, the initiating and learning phases, we all recognize that you're going to need to show some courage to do some things that that you don't know what to do, like don't know how to do. That takes courage, and that you're also going to have the humility to recognize that you're going to make mistakes, and it's okay. And so when you mix those two things together, when you decide that, hey, I'm going to have to do something here that I don't want to do, and it's very likely that I'm going to make mistakes, and I'm okay with that. Now you have this confidence, right? That's what gives you the confidence to feel free to start, is that making the choice to be courageous and realizing that you're going to make mistakes and being okay with that. But then at some point, when you get into the more of the mastery stage, now we start to feel a different kind of confidence. We start to feel confidence now as a result of, hey, I'm pretty good at this, and so I feel good at this. And so our confidence shifts from one that's from a confidence that's based in the ability to show courage and humility to one that's based in being good at things. Over time, there's this kind of natural shift. But the reality is you can't continue to be courageous when you've become comfortable with your skills. Like, it's impossible to show courage from a place of comfort. You know, by definition, if you're comfortable, you're not afraid of anything. And so if you're not afraid of anything, there's no courage to be shown. Courage is overcoming fear. So once you become comfortable with your skill, then you can't show courage anymore. And so that's where people level out, right? That's kind of your mid-career burnout. You keep doing the same thing over and over and over, and you get comfortable, and there's no longer any courage to be shown. But the weird thing here is that we've shifted our confidence. And so at the beginning, the confidence that allowed us to start, the confidence that we based in showing the courage to get going and do the hard things, and the humility to realize that we're going to screw up when we do that, shifts. And so a competent person who has equated their confidence with comfort, they lose the ability to show the version of confidence that actually made them competent to begin with. You see what I mean? Do you see that switch?
Yeah, sure.
And so that's a challenge. And so once we reach that point where we start to feel confidence based in being comfortable, it's important that we that we continue to drive forward using courage and humility to generate confidence, and that creates a much more resilient version of confidence. Because I'll tell you what, when I accidentally shot the wrong person in the face, right before I did that, I felt pretty damn confident, right? And right after that, I felt no confidence whatsoever. So how good of a confidence how good is your confidence really if it's destroyed that easy? Like there's just no resilience there whatsoever to your confidence. There's no and it's completely out of your control. I mean, things can happen. You can get bad results that are completely out of your control, and boom, there goes your confidence. I mean, how confident can you feel in a situation where you don't have any control?
Yeah.
Sorry, I get on a roll here. You interrupt me whenever you.
No.
I love talking about this stuff. So
I'm enjoying it. I see how you can start something as being open to learning and humble and willing to try new things, and then as you get better, and career is a good example of that. You start as a guy in the academy with no prior knowledge, or maybe minor knowledge, and you transition through field training in your rookie year, and all of a sudden it's 10 years later, it's 20 years later. You could even be into like a specialty assignment like you're in, or like a supervisor position by that point, and feeling like you have mastered the job, right? And from my experience was that right before I promoted, I was hitting that mastery level. And not to say that I knew everything about every possible thing in law enforcement, but in my sphere of influence, I had kind of I don't want to say peaked, but absent going to a different specialty assignment or something like that, the next transition for me was to try something new, to be totally willing to just put my neck on the line and test, and test early in my career, test sitting next to mentors in the department who were going for the same position I was. And it's kind of funny in the context that you're talking about it in, because that would be correct confidence under your definition, if I understand you correctly, right? Being willing to stick your neck out and try something new and take another step can get interpreted as arrogance, or that kind of thing by others. I have a lot of questions, but what's your experience been with, we're cynics, and I've talked about this on the show before about why we're cynics and how it's important. It keeps us alive at times, but as a group, we're also cynical with each other. How do you suggest people overcome that, or put that aside if they want to try new things, but and I know the answer is partly that we shouldn't base our confidence on what anyone else thinks about you, but in an enclosed society like we are, where we rely on each other, that's really tough. How do you think people need to begin this process of humility and courageous behavior all at the same time in that environment?
Yeah, and that's what's difficult, right? It's so difficult. Like, me as a SWAT guy, and I go to in-service training, right, where every cop in the department goes through this in-service training, and I'm there in front of maybe brand new officers, maybe 20-year veterans. I'm there with guys who have skill levels maybe greater than mine, and some that have skill levels way less than mine. And I'd be lying to you if there's not a part of me that feels like, hey, like I'm looked at. Everyone knows that I'm the SWAT guy here, right? I can't screw this up. Like, they're expecting me to do everything right, and of course I want to do everything right. But the reality is I might screw up. Like, I'm literally one of the highest trained police officers in my entire state. Just no SWAT team in our state trains as much as we do. I get this amazing amount of training, as much as anybody in my entire state, but I screw up all the time. To get at your question, that's the tricky spot, is that it takes courage. Like, it takes courage to stand in front of people and say, hey, I screwed this up. I'll give you an example. We were on a SWAT call out a couple weeks ago, and without getting into the details of the call, I was placed in kind of charge. I was responsible for a certain small group as a part of this call out. And some weird things happened, and things didn't turn out exactly like we hoped they would. And largely it is a result of what I had going, what I was responsible for. And initially I felt like everybody else did. There's this initial bit of defensiveness where you want to defend what you did because we tie up our again, this is not an easy battle to fight because we're so ingrained in believing that our confidence comes in being good at things. But when we screw up, we want to defend it because if we admit that we screwed up, then we're all basically admitting to a decline in our own confidence, right? If you admit that you screwed this up, then your competence is not as high, and so if you base your competence in that, then your confidence goes down with it, and we don't want that. So we defend ourselves in these situations where we screw up. And I admit I felt a little bit of that in this case. I wasn't quite sure what I should have done differently, or that maybe I should have done anything differently. But as I sat with it a little more, I realized that there was mistakes I made. And things I could have done to make this better. And so I had to come then to my team, and it takes courage to come to these people who you respect and who you want to be, viewed as competent. Mm-hmm. That's the difficult thing is that's where the courage comes in. And I had to come to them and say, you know what, I screwed these things up, and the result. So that's a scary thing because I was entrusted with this responsibility and I screwed it up. But I want to be entrusted with that responsibility again. And so there's this resistance to talk about the screw up because then you think, oh, they might not trust me to do this again. But in reality, quite the opposite happened, right? I come to my team and I say, hey, I screwed this up. These are all the things we could have done better. And so that takes tremendous courage to do that. And that shows some humility. Sure. But the result of that was that the people on that team, my mentors, the people that I look to and that I really want the respect of, came to me and said, hey, I have a lot of respect for you that you did that, and it showed leadership and it showed humility and all these things that I want to show is what I did by taking is what I ultimately portrayed to them, and they portrayed to me as being valuable because I was able to show the courage and the humility. And not to pat myself on the back, I'm just trying to give an example of how that works in the real world.
No, I think you're totally right. And if you're an avid reader, I think we might have even talked about this, like something that's emphasized by Jocko Willink in his book Extreme Ownership and in his podcast, right? And I found that to be absolutely true 100%, that if you own it, people will respect that far greater than pretending it doesn't exist or pretending that you were right the whole way. Especially if you're in some sort of a leadership position, like you're a squad leader or a sergeant or something like that, where you're in charge of these decisions. You need to understand that you're gonna make mistakes. I think the challenge for a lot of us is we might have command staff who needs to understand that as well, right? That we're going to make mistakes and be afforded that freedom in some sense.
And that's the hard thing is that organization. So there's confidence on an individual level, and then there's organizational confidence, and that's I struggle with that sometimes at our department too, where one we don't talk about the mistakes that we make as often as we should, it doesn't feel because we haven't created an environment where people feel like it's safe to do that. We make people think that they're going to get disciplined if they screw up. We got to enter it into some system that tracks, all the conversations between you and your supervisor and all that. And so people don't want to speak up. And so we've created this environment. So, it's going to take kind of a cultural organizational change to really make that spread. And that's part of what we're trying to do, with the podcast. And I know, I was thinking about this before I come on the show with you. It's like your story of, basically starting your podcast and saying, hey, I decided that I'm going to start getting back in shape. I let myself slip a little bit, and I'm going to do that. Like that took tremendous courage, right? To start that, to step out and say, hey, I've been failing in this area of my life. Took a huge amount of courage to do that. And it takes a huge amount of humility to recognize that in yourself, because there's a ton of people out there who are in that same place that you were in, but won't acknowledge it. They refuse to acknowledge it. And so like, I think it's awesome that you showed the courage and the humility, and I can only imagine, like, if my theory is correct and my theory proves out, I'm guessing that you feel more confident since you started this podcast than you did before it. Would I be right?
Yeah. Short answer, yes. One word answer, yes. And thank you for the kind words too. The challenge in all of that, and I'll throw this back at you too, is no, you're 100% correct, and it goes all the way back to like you say about how you wanted to be good at podcasting before you started podcasting, right? You can't get good at podcasting until you hit record, right? And
Right.
it's just a matter of that. There's a bit of that imposter syndrome and that paralysis by analysis before we all start. Any of us start anything. What's been interesting to me is that as this progresses, as this gains popularity, and I still maintain some of those same struggles or new struggles that we talk about on this show, the imposter syndrome kicks in. And I'm sure you're familiar with that, right?
I'm all over that, brother.
So that's something that so for people who don't understand the imposter syndrome, it's a concept that you're a fraud, you're a fake, you're going to be found out, and that everyone's going to laugh at you. So it's basically,
who am I? Who am I to do this?
Who am I to do this?
Who am I to start a podcast and talk about these things?
Right. There's someone out there who's better qualified than me to talk about this. And the truth is there's always somebody better than you out there who's better trained, who's got better knowledge and all that sort of stuff. The simple fact is that for most of us who are doing any sort of thing like this is that they're just not doing it. They might be better at it. They're just not doing it. There is a cop out there who is a brilliant podcaster, a brilliant creative mind with some of these things, who's going through this, who's way better at it than I am. But he's sitting at home and not doing it.
Right.
Or he's doing something else in his free time.
Yep.
That has been an interesting experience to go through, and to see that come into play. Because when I started this, and it was like literally me and my wife and one friend downloading this, it didn't matter.
Right.
It's like because I was having this conversation anyway, and it was like it doesn't matter because nobody's out there listening. But when you start getting emails from people all over the world, and you see the response to the show start to increase, that gets into your head. Your confidence is in that, because you start to wonder, you if you're not careful, and like you're saying, you tie your confidence to your competence as either a podcaster or for me, the success in health and fitness, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this is why I wanted to have you on, is because I think you're 100% on track and I'm totally on board with this idea that your confidence should be tied to anything but your competence in something that you're doing. And that I am, to say that I'm giving you a long-winded answer, but the short answer is absolutely yes. Doing something new, putting myself out there and trying something new has made me hugely confident. And you've probably experienced this as well, having the humility it's hard to say humility and then talk about yourself, but having vulnerability is a better word. Being willing to be vulnerable and talk about these things in an international forum like this has greatly improved my life, because I get the response back tenfold of people saying, "Me too," right? And then this community of people is created that I know not only is this helping somebody else out there, but it's helping me back in return when people correspond or share their stories or share their struggles, right? And then when you realize you're not an outlier on the bottom of the bell curve in that sense, it really does bring you up. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, and one more thing, you mentioned, making mistakes. There's one thing when you really start paying attention to humility, and you really make humility a focus of yours. There's kind of this weird thing that happens where it almost makes it worse to a degree. But then when you realize you need that humility to feel confidence. But here's what I mean: that a really humble person, and somebody who's focusing on that, will feel like they make more mistakes than somebody who's not. Right. And so because you're aware of it, you're aware that you've made all these mistakes, and now you're looking for them. And so like, I feel like I make way more mistakes now than I did 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. But the reality of it is that I'm way better now at what I do than I was then. It's just I'm recognizing more mistakes.
Right.
So that's kind of a weird thing that happens. So don't, when people start initially kind of going down this, humility journey, that's why it can't be all humility and it can't be all courage. You got to have them both at the same time, because if you go too far down the humility track and then you realize, man, I just screw up all the time, I can never get this right, then you don't have the courage to get back in the ring.
Yep.
But if you're just all courageous all the time and you think that, hey, I'm just going to push forward no matter what, and I'm not going to look back, and I'm not going to reevaluate what I did, I'm just going to push forward all the time, that doesn't work either. So I put this into kind of a diagram where it's kind of hard to see, or it's kind of hard to it's impossible to see in audio format. But if you imagine kind of a graph with four boxes.
Mm-hmm.
So on the left axis is the vertical axis is humility. So as you move up this chart, there's more humility, and then as you move from left to right, there's more courage. And so I kind of create this box. So the top left box, which is going to be highest in humility but lowest in courage. I call that compliant people. These people are compliant. They're happy to be doing whatever it is they're doing. They'll do whatever it is that you tell them because they really don't have any courage. They're just kind of happy being where they are, and they know that they screw up all the time, and they're okay with it. They don't really have a desire to get any better. They're just kind of really happy, generally pleasant people. And there's a whole lot of compliant people in this world that have a whole lot of humility but not enough courage. Now down below them, so the lower left box, this is people who lack humility and courage. I'm calling them the critics, right? They're real quick to point the finger at someone else, but they don't have the courage to look at themselves. They're really not. They're not going to take they won't take a stand on anything that they do, but they'll be happy to point the finger at you, and so they lack courage and humility. The lower right box, which is going to be high levels of courage and low levels of humility, those are your cocky people. Okay. That was me for a large portion of my life. There was a lot of courage there. I was happy to think about all the things that I'm going to do and look at all my successes, and I'll share it with you, and let's talk about me. And and a lot of times these people are go after it, go getters. They'll attack the problem. They're a lot of times high achieving people are in this cocky range because they have a huge amounts of courage, but they have no humility. And then the truly, what we're going after here, the competence is in the high right. And so I kind of use that phrase high right to remind myself a lot of times. I picture this box, and anytime I'm starting to feel that fear, I'm starting to feel that resistance inside of me. It's an opportunity to be high right. And so I show humility, show courage, whatever it is. I kind of use that as a decision-making guide, a way to guide, whatever circumstance I'm in. I say, what should I do here? I want to be high right. I want to be courageous. I want to be humble. Let's put them together. That makes me, feel free to confront whatever it is I'm looking at. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but
yeah, and I'll post that graph in our show notes too for people to see it who aren't auditory in there.
Yeah.
I think this is a really interesting conversation. It applies on so many. I mean, we could keep talking about this for a long time, I think, because I'm at a point where I'm kind of looking at my career and what has transpired over the last 11, almost 12 years. And I have, I'm working right now. I'm working with a few new people, brand new to the job. We have a whole group of trainees that are coming in right now, fresh out of the academy. So there's a lot of that. And then we have a lot of veterans coming back to the street too from these specialty assignments that are getting shut down because we are just so short-staffed. And I'm just thinking as we're talking about it, all these different people I know and the stages they're in of their career and where they're tying their confidence to, and who is doing it right under this framework that you're proposing, and who is maybe attached to the wrong things. And it's just an interesting idea as a sergeant and for the supervisor out there. I think it's important to understand this, and not only in yourself so that you know how to help people moving forward, but to help others. Like I was counseling a newer guy, and counseling is the wrong word because that sounds so formal, but I was trying to give him a better perspective of the big picture on a particular call, and showing him that, just reassuring him that he's going to make mistakes, and I'm totally okay with that. Mm-hmm. But that we just need to talk about these and be open about them so that we understand that they are mistakes and that we can learn from them. Because it's one of those things, like you say, I laughed when you said, you make way more mistakes now than you used to. It's just because you're self-aware about it. And teaching self-awareness is really tough. It's really tough to type A people. It's tough to people who are already, especially fresh out of the academy and have already been told they don't know anything, and now they finally have this sense that they know what they're doing, and and then this feeling that I'm out of the academy, I'm off field training, I'm a rookie officer, and I still don't know, I'm still being schooled. Mm-hmm. So that approach and how we teach people and the humility to instill in them some courage, I think is a big deal, and how we lead. So here's what I want to ask. self-awareness doesn't come about overnight, and it doesn't come about without some real effort. What are the things you've done or do? Like, do you have a morning practice or something that you do consistently to help with your self-awareness?
Like you say, it really does have to be a daily practice, and I'm glad you brought up the word self-awareness, because I think one of the podcasts, or maybe just in some social media thing I posted, basically had this concept that humility is really nothing more than self-awareness, but it goes a little bit deeper than that. Is that we're not going to be aware that we're unaware. Like you don't know these, you don't know that you're unaware. Like people who generally lack humility don't know that they lack humility.
Right.
And so really humility is the awareness that you're going to be unaware that you're unaware. And that gets, it's kind of deep, but I'm not trying to be obtuse, but
it totally makes sense. Yeah.
And so it's looking for, so it's always, there's a couple of ways I work that into my daily life. It's like, I try really hard not to make an argument for something that I couldn't just as easily make an argument against. Because if I don't feel like I can make an argument against it, then I'm not seeing the whole picture. There's a blind spot that I'm unaware of. So,
interesting.
That's one thing that I try to do. And of course, I'm not always successful at this, but that's one thing that I think about. And it's just having that awareness. It's asking people. And it's always considering the fact, like, in police work and in any sort of high stakes environment, like, you're going to have to make decisions, and you're going to have to, you want to be right. It's not that we should try to be wrong. You should try to be right, and you want to be right. I lost my train of thought there. We'll see.
Well, while you dig it up, I think you're absolutely right that it makes total sense that humility, the people who aren't humble don't know it, but it's trying to achieve that, and that, for me, that was a process. What was that Donald Rumsfeld quote back from early days? Like,
yeah,
the thing
the
we don't know, the knowns,
and
the unknowns, and the things we don't know that we don't know. It's like,
yeah, and that's what I was going to say. Is that you should always be just as certain that you're wrong as you are that you're right.
Yeah.
Because we're going to try to be right, and we're going to make the right choice. We want to try to make the right choice, but you need to always be certain, just as certain that you're wrong as you are that you're right, because there's an equal possibility. And so it's looking for those, like, am I wrong? Is there something that I'm missing here? And talking to other people about it, asking yourself about it, and being honest about it. And humility. I could go off for another hour on humility. In fact, I'm about to record an upcoming show on humility, so I'll really kind of go in depth on that on our podcast. But it's a tricky thing, especially for high achieving people. I mean, anybody who has any level of success fights that battle with arrogance. I mean, I really believe that. And if they don't think so, then that the arrogance is already kind of snuck in and is snuck through your defenses.
So what is it? So back to, like, you said, you have a practice, or you have. What is it you do? I mean, do you journal? Do you meditate? Do you just talk things out in the car on the way to work by yourself, or do you have a mentor that you go to? What is it that you do to see your path the way it is?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit of all of the above. I do try to reflect every day. So one of the things, I off and on I journal. I've done it sometimes, and I it's one of those things that kind of comes and goes for me. But I do spend a lot of time, reflecting every day. I think consciously. I may not write it down, but I consciously think about the things I did that day to be courageous, and the things I did that day to be humble. And so that's something that happens every day. And I don't always write it down. I should get better at writing it down.
What are some of the things that you would do in a day to be courageous? Is kind of an easy. Well, I don't know if it's easy to understand, but trying something new. Pausing before you react to the comment from your lieutenant or your sergeant, pausing before you react to your kid having a meltdown. I mean, those all can be courageous things to stop what you're doing and take a beat, create some space between the input and the output. But what are some of the things, like what's an example of being humble throughout the day, or humility? Because I'm sure someone out there is going, well, if you identify it as being humble and you congratulate yourself for being humble, are you really being humble?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Well, humility it's a valued thing, and so if you are showing humility, you shouldn't be afraid of that. And a lot of times humility is not. There's a lot of misconceptions about humility. Humility is not just not talking about yourself. I mean, confident people know how to talk about themselves in the right way at the right time for the right reason. Okay, just because you don't talk about yourself doesn't mean that you're humble. Humility is more about what you think, not so much what you say.
Interesting. I like that.
Yeah, really. I mean, outwardly, it's hard to tell if somebody's really outwardly being humble. It's really hard to tell.
Yeah.
And only if you really get to know somebody well do you kind of get a sense for that, because it's very deceiving.
So let me ask you this, because one thing, we have a promotion test process, the long process, go through recently, and we have another one coming up, and people have come to me with requests or asking for advice and that sort of thing. And one of the things that people always struggle with, whether it's a test for narcs or a sergeant or like a corporal, is the ability to talk about themselves positively. And we in our culture really look down on that. But in order for us to achieve what we want to achieve, we need to overcome a lot of that too. I think you hit something right on the head right there with the idea that humility is not just not talking about yourself, but there's a confidence issue too. And I don't even know if I have a question out of this, but I just see so many people struggling with being able to present themselves and present their skills, their assets. I mean, there's people who would be amazing at any of these jobs that I just discussed who struggle with demonstrating their competence via talking about themselves, right? They think that their actions speak for themselves, and they can't. They just don't in a process that's like a civil service process like that. How does somebody, maybe the question is, how does somebody become confident enough to be humble? Or I don't know. Am I making any sense, or do you see what I'm saying about the testing process and people who just can't get out there and talk, well, I did this and I've done this and I've done this. And maybe the problem is that maybe their confidence isn't tied to their competence in these other skills, and they don't want to talk about those things. But I don't know how we achieve that for people. That's been on the top of my mind the last couple of days.
Yeah, I mean, I think there really is this gross misunderstanding of what humility is. And people think that if they talk about what they've done, that they're not being humble. I mean, look, everyone, like, the goal is to be good at things, right? And so why would it, like, if you want to get this job, well, you want to be good at that job. You want to show that you could do that job well. So if the goal is to be good, why would it be wrong to talk about being good? That's what we're all trying to accomplish anyway, is being good. But like I say, it's the way that you do it, and how you do it, and the time that you do it. And you mentioned earlier, like, always, that there's always somebody who's better. Just because you say you're really good at something doesn't mean that you're telling the world you're an expert, or that you're the best, the best that's ever been. Mm-hmm. It just means that you're good at things. Everybody has natural strengths, and in fact, if you have a strength and you're not willing to share that strength with the world, then you're doing the world a disservice, right? You should be willing to share what you have to bring, and if not, you're not providing the service that you put here to provide. Yeah,
I think you're right, and I think you probably answered the question in the sense that just because, or maybe I answered earlier when I said it, but just because you have a talent, you have a skill set, doesn't mean that there's anyone else out there that doesn't. But we need to be proud of those things, but humble about them. Understand that. I think that's probably the combination. That's the recipe, is being proud of what you've been able to accomplish, being proud of being the courage you've shown by putting yourself out there to learn these things, to gain these experiences, but being humble enough to understand that there is still somebody out there that's better than you. In anything you do. And that's just in anything. There's a better husband out there than me. Oh, I call a lot of husbands that are better than me.
But there's no better husband to your wife than you.
Yes, right. Exactly.
Hopefully.
Hopefully, yeah. Fingers crossed. No. So, work on the edges of the podcast. I really enjoy listening to you, and I appreciate you emailing me about it, Nick. It's not just in specific to law enforcement. You talk about these topics in a broader scope that apply to a lot of different people, not just us. I mean, you share your experiences, but you put it in a context that I like, that it's not just for law enforcement, because I think these things like competence and confidence could, I mean, my wife could listen to that and get something from that, or my kids when they're older, that sort of thing. So I've enjoyed it a lot. Where can people find out more about you and the show?
Yeah, thanks for saying that, Garrett. I really appreciate it. That's nice of you. Like you kind of had that similar experience where, I don't really know what I'm doing. I mean, my website looks like crap. My sound is not as good as I would hope for it to be, and I don't know how to fix either of those things right now. I'm just kind of pressing forward and trying to send the message out there and hoping it gets received well. And I'm getting some good feedback, and I'm encouraged by that. So I appreciate that. I really don't have, it's workontheedge.com is the website, but there's really not a whole lot there other than the podcast episodes, which are probably a lot more convenient to find on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you find podcasts. If you want to go there and give us a listen, I'd appreciate it.
Well, they can also go to your website and get your book that's on competence and confidence that you have there, right? That you have.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. So I do offer so I call it an audio book, but I wrote out the book and I've recorded it in kind of an audio format that talks a lot more in depth about all these things we're talking about today. I'm in the process of kind of revising that. That's probably going to come down to I'm going to try to get an actual hard copy version of this book, revise it, add to it, kind of. Chop it up a little bit, but that's kind of a project that I'm working on now. But for now, you can go there and download the audio of that. Thanks for bringing that up. I forgot about that.
Yeah, and like us too, they can go onto the website and sign up for the mailing list at your website too if they want to learn more about some of the stuff and keep updated on what you're doing.
Yeah.
Nick, thanks for your time. Oh, Instagram? I forgot to ask. Instagram? Twitter?
I am on. Yeah, I mean,
as a show.
I don't do a whole. More Facebook right now. I'm trying to get more into Instagram, but I didn't have a Facebook account, an Instagram, a Twitter, or whatever. None of that. I had none of that with until just a couple of months ago, and I decided that I really want to start spreading the word about the show, and that was a good way to do it. So I haven't really delved into the social media stuff yet, but I am there on Facebook mostly, and there a little bit of Instagram.
Well, we'll post links to your accounts there in the show notes for this show, too. You can go to thesquadroom.net for those links if you want to connect with Nick. Nick Frankus, Portland PD. Thanks for being with us, man. It was a good conversation. I could keep talking, but I know we both got to bounce off to other things, so thanks for being with us.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
All right, thanks for listening to The Squad Room. If you like what you heard today, if you got something out of this conversation with Nick, please consider leaving a review on iTunes. It really helps us promote the show, spread the word out there, and help people all around the world. If you heard something today that you know a friend or a loved one needs to hear, please tell them about the show. You can go to thesquadroom.net and email this episode directly to them. To keep up to date on The Squad Room, you can text The Squad Room, all one word, to 44222 to get signed up for our mailing list directly from your phone. You can also follow me on Instagram and Twitter at The Squad Room or on Facebook. Our job is tough, much tougher than anything that can be put into a few words, and our confidence is a struggle and it's a challenge every day, and not something we can accomplish in 60 minutes with Nick. But if you want to reach out, start a conversation, ask a question, you can reach me at Garrett@thesquadroom.net. That's 2 R's, 2 T's in Garrett. Lastly, I want to tell you that this episode is brought to you by Audible.com. With over 180,000 titles in their inventory, Audible has hundreds of audiobooks that apply to us. If it's a slow shift or a long commute, audiobooks are a great way to continue your education. You can go and get your free 30-day free trial and a free audiobook of your choice by going to audibletrial.com/The Squad Room to sign up. Until next time, take care of each other and stay safe.